Now, the biggest reform of divorce law for 50 years comes into force today. A no-fault divorce means that couples won't have to separate for at least 2 years or blame one another to legally end their marriage. Now, it's something that will make a difference to all kinds of people. Why is it being introduced now? And is it all good? Rita Gupta is a family lawyer in Reading. So first of all, it feels as though we've been waiting for this for ages, Rita. How needed is this concept of a no-fault divorce?
Oh, good morning. Absolutely, it's needed and something that family lawyers have been campaigning for many years. I think as society, our attitudes and approach towards divorce has changed. And what we had is a set of laws that were almost 50 years old. And what this new law seeks to do is try to bring things in a much more modern way. The terminology has changed, and to promote the fact that if parties want to separate, that they can actually do that in a way that is less acrimonious, that they don't have to blame the other party, or that they don't have to wait for a period of time, because sometimes people just want to start the next chapter quickly and to move on. So
the reality, I was going to say, the reality is it just in terms of that concept of having to blame the other party, for example, is that sometimes splits can be perfectly amicable, but by the time you've gone through, as you describe it, quite an outdated process of having to come up with 5 or 6 reasons why you want to divorce the other person, when actually you don't really want to blame them at all, all of a sudden that amicable split becomes a lot less amicable when you've still got things to sort out, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's many people who fall out of love or grow apart. More and more in the last few years, I've seen the rise in what we call the silver separator, older couples getting divorced once the children have left home. And those people, they don't want to say negative things about the other party. They want to keep a level of respect. So actually using the divorce petition as a platform to air grievances is very rarely a positive thing. I can see why that, it sets the tone negatively from the outset.
Now, let's talk about the other changes that are kind of bundled up with this, that may not be that obvious. And you talked a moment ago about the idea of not having to wait a fixed period of time before you can divorce the other party without having to blame them for anything. It doesn't mean that this process is actually any quicker, does it? When it comes to the nuts and bolts, once you decide that you want to go through with the divorce, a no-fault divorce is not a quickie divorce, is it?
No, absolutely right. It is not an online quickie divorce, and certainly there is no family lawyer that's going to be promoting that somebody enter into this decision lightly. There still has to be a period whereby people think very carefully about issuing an application for a divorce. In fact, you still have to be married for 12 months before you can actually issue a divorce application. So that aspect hasn't changed. You can't get married and then a few days later decide to issue a divorce application. And the period of time that this will take will be a minimum of 6 months. And built into that is 20 weeks of reflection period. So parties can consider a reconciliation. They can consider how they want to reach child arrangements and a financial settlement. So by no means is this designed to undermine the sanctity of marriage.
And that sort of 20-week period is new, isn't it, as part of this particular type of divorce?
The minimum period, absolutely. I would say that in general, very few divorces actually from start to finish go through within 6 months in any event. And I would envisage that if there are finances to deal with, that it would take longer than that. But that minimum period is there. And I think the reflection period should be used by parties very carefully.
This is also a move towards the digital, isn't it? So these divorce applications need to be made online now.
Well, if you are acting in person, you can actually deal with the application on paper as well. It would be wholly wrong to insist that everything is online. Some people aren't confident using technology in that way. But if you have a solicitor acting for you, then it does have to be done online. And actually, that was the system before. We have had an online portal before. But there is the move towards making it a simpler process. But that doesn't mean divorce is easier. The peripheral issues around a separation of a marriage breakdown are still there.
The other interesting part of this is that divorces can no longer be contested. Now, I don't know how often you come up against a situation where one party wants to divorce the other and the other person contests it, to know how big a deal this is actually.
Well, defended divorce proceedings, most family lawyers would say, are quite rare. I have had a few, and they can be used as an opportunity to obstruct the process and delay matters. And I think if there's a coercively controlling or abusive situation, I would say that process has been used in that way in the past. Now you can't dispute, so the terminology has actually changed from defended to dispute a petition, an application, unless there are very specific grounds such as jurisdiction. So I think that it's symbolic that you can't actually dispute an application now moving forward. I know that they are quite rare to defend a petition, but you don't have that process now. So it means that it hopefully people who want to exit a marriage and are in these toxic relationships can deal with the process much easier.
So if the idea behind this is to make divorce less acrimonious and to simplify the whole system, there are potentially a couple of implications of that, aren't there? In the longer term, do you think more people will end up trying to go through the divorce process themselves without the likes of representation from family lawyers like yourself, because this whole system has been simplified? You don't have to come up with a reason why you're divorcing the other person.
I think that there are many people over the last few years who want to deal with the divorce petition themselves. But the actual, as I said, the peripheral issues of dealing with the financial settlement, which is probably the hardest aspect and maybe the most acrimonious aspect of it, they still remain. That process hasn't changed. So obtaining independent legal advice and early legal advice is still very important. And I would say that people need to do that before they go online and issue their application. They need to think about things very carefully and not make this decision in haste. So whilst I think there may be some people that will go online and want to deal with the divorce application themselves, they still will need to take expert legal advice when they're talking about a financial settlement or their child arrangements.
And are you expecting, are you expecting there to be an increase in the number of people going through with divorce as a result of this? Because I know people who have been holding on for this change in the law, and I suspect that we are going to see a bit of a surge at the beginning because they didn't want to blame the other party. And so there's a lot of people kind of delayed divorces, if you like. But in the longer term, will simplification make it more of an option for some people?
Well, I absolutely agree that there will be a short-term spike, because I have clients also who have waited for this change. They're not insisting that we deal with everything today, but they've been waiting for this change to have what they think is an amicable divorce. Long-term, do I think this is going to increase the divorce rate? No, I don't. I think that, all of the more complex issues surrounding a marriage breakdown still remain. People enter into marriage having put a great deal of thought into the process, usually, and I think they will exit in the same way. I don't think that anybody is advocating that people leave their marriage without really exploring whether there is a possibility of salvaging it. I don't think it's going to lead to a long-term increase in divorce rates, no.
Rita, good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on. That's Rita Gupta, family lawyer from Reading.